Hey everybody, it's Josh here again. So today I'm going to show you how to create a full-blown Active Directory lab on your personal computer using VirtualBox. So configuring and running this lab will definitely help your understanding of how Active Directory works as well as Windows networking in general. I'd recommend maybe running through it a few times just to kind of get used to it and kind of develop that intuition and base knowledge. And then after a few times, I would recommend even try building this lab we're about to do without watching this video, just to like see if you can do it and kind of learn along the way. So just to give a high level overview and a kind of visualization of what we're going to do in this lab, I'm going to use this kind of diagram that you can look at to get an idea. So the first thing we're going to do is download and install Oracle VirtualBox, which is what we're going to use to run our virtual machines on. After that's installed, we're going to download a Windows 10 ISO and a Server 2019 ISO that we're going to use to install the two operating systems on two separate virtual machines. Next, after we have everything downloaded and installed, we're going to create our first virtual machine, which is going to be our domain controller, which is going to house Active Directory. We're going to give this virtual machine two network adapters. One is going to be used to connect to the outside internet, and the other one is going to be used to connect to the VirtualBox kind of private network that the clients are going to connect to. After our virtual machine is created, we're going to install Server 2019 on it, and then we're going to assign IP addressing for the internal network. The external network will automatically get IP addressing from your home network or like your home router, so we don't have to worry about it. After we have IP addressing set up, we're going to name the server, and then we're going to install Active Directory and create our domain. Then we're going to configure NAT and routing so the clients on the private network can reach the internet through the domain controller. Next, we're going to set up a DHCP on the domain controller, so when we create our Windows 10 machine, it can automatically get an IP address. And then the last thing we do on the domain controller before we create our client virtual machine is we're going to run a PowerShell script that will automatically create 1,000 users in Active Directory. And I'll kind of go through the script a little bit to explain what each line is, so you can kind of get an intuition on how PowerShell is useful and like what kind of things you can use it for. After creating the users, we're going to create another virtual machine and install Windows 10 on it, and that virtual machine will be connected to the private VirtualBox network. We're going to name that machine Client1 and join it to the domain, and then we're going to log into it with one of our domain accounts. At this point, our tutorial is going to be pretty much concluded. So this environment we're building is a pretty basic Windows networking environment with Active Directory and then just a few networking services, and we'll also use this environment for future videos to come. I'm hoping with this video and the subsequent ones that you can kind of get a better understanding of how the environment might work at like in your office or your school or something, where you can take the same username and log into like a bunch of different computers with that same name without having to really do anything. Hopefully, like observing this video and kind of building the environment, you can generate that understanding, and it will help you in the future, hopefully. Also, everything we're doing in this video, you can kind of use as your own generated experience, like something to put on your resume. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, just check out this video. It explains everything. But yeah, so if you're excited to learn some new skills and stuff, go ahead and smash that like button for the algorithm, and let's get started. So the first thing we're going to do is download VirtualBox. So just go to the link in the description. It just links to here. And it doesn't matter if you have Windows or Mac, just pick the appropriate one and download it and install it. And after VirtualBox is installed, go ahead and download the extension pack as well. It should be on here somewhere. I'm blind right now. Oh, extension pack, just download this right here after you install VirtualBox. So first install VirtualBox, then install the extension pack. Then after VirtualBox is done, go to this link in the description to download Windows 10. And you may have to fill out some stuff in here, like pick Windows 10, confirm, choose your language, say English, confirm, and choose 64-bit. I'm not going to download this again because I already did, but just make sure you remember where you downloaded it. Like put it on the desktop or something if you are scared you might forget. So download Windows 10, put it on the desktop, and then go to the Server 2019 link. Again, I'll put this in the description. Make sure you select ISO here and continue, and you have to fill out all the stuff. You might have to log in. I'm not sure because I'm already logged in, but just do the same thing, fill it out. 64-bit if it asks. I don't think it will because I think they're all 64-bit now, but just download both of them in the same location and don't forget where you put them. Cool. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to create our virtual machines. So go ahead and open up VirtualBox. Yours might look slightly different if you're running it on PC, but we'll go to new and we're going to create the Server 2019 computer first. So let's just name this something simple like DC for domain controller, and then we'll pick other Windows 64-bit and we'll say continue. And then It depends on how much RAM you have. Hopefully you have at least 8, but I'm gonna give it 2 gigabytes of RAM. You can do the same thing. 2048 megabytes is 2 gigabytes. So just say continue. We'll create the disk with the defaults. Continue, and this location's fine. So we have our DC has been created, but there's nothing on it yet. So before we install Server 2019, let's go to settings and we're gonna change a few things in here first. So we'll go to advanced first, and this share clipboard and drag and drop, let's change these both to bidirectional. This share clipboard bidirectional, it means you can Control C, Control V, like in between your actual computer and the virtual machine. And drag and drop bidirectional means you can drag files like from your desktop into the virtual machine. It's pretty easy. I don't really necessarily plan to use them, but it's nice to turn them on. So we'll go to system really quick and then go to processor. Again, depending on what kind of CPU you have. If you know what you have and you know you have a lot of cores, go ahead and like increase it. But if you have no idea, or if you're on some laptop that you think may suck, just leave it at 1 core. But I'm gonna change mine to 4. It tends to speed things up a little bit. And then lastly, we'll go to network here. And remember, if we look at the diagram, we're creating our domain controller right now. So we want to have 2 NICs. We want one that's dedicated for the internet, that's going to be running NAT, and then we'll have one that's dedicated for the internal VMware network. So our first adapter, this is the one it comes with it already. It's NATed. This is going to connect to our house internet. So we want to add one more adapter. So we're going to add one, and it's going to be on the internal network. So we'll say okay to this. And then now our VM is pretty much configured, but it's still empty. So we're going to go ahead and double click it to start it. It's going to open up this window somewhere. Mine opened on like the other monitor for some reason. So this is where we're going to select the Server 2019 ISO that we downloaded earlier. So we'll click this, and we're going to go to add. I already did it, but we'll go to add, and you'll browse to where you put the Server 2019 ISO. It might be in a different location. In fact, it will be, and it will probably be named something weird depending on what, the name was when you downloaded. But anyway, go to the Server 2019 ISO and double click it to select it. And then you'll have selected it here, and we'll say choose, and then we'll say start to start the virtual machine. And this whole process tends to take a while. So I'm going to kind of trim my video up a little bit so you don't have to wait for mine to go, but you may have to pause my video several times because your computer's probably going to take a while to install everything. So I just want to say that, and if it looks like my thing is going faster than yours. Cool. So now that it has started up, we'll just go next and we'll say install. And then we're going to select either one of the desktop experience ones. If we select one of these ones, the non-desktop experience, after it installs, it's just going to have a command line and we won't have any GUI. So go ahead and select standard, I suppose, desktop experience, and we'll say next, and we'll accept these license agreements, and we're going to say custom install. If we already have some version of server installed already on this VM, we may select this one if we want, but we're just going to format the hard drive and install it from scratch. So we'll just say select that one custom, and then we'll say next. And this part will take a while, so I'm just going to trim this out. Also, the server is going to restart several times during this phase, and it will get to a black screen where it's press any button to boot. You don't want to do that because you don't want to boot into the setup again. Just don't touch it, and then it will end up booting into Windows eventually. So here we can leave this and let it will restart by itself, or we can just kind of force it. And then here's the screen. You don't want to push anything here, so don't push anything. It's doing it again. Don't push anything. Just let it start up again. Cool. Okay, so Server 2019 is installed. So let's, this is the built-in kind of default administrator account. So let's just give it a password of password1 with a capital P. Just like this. We're going to use this password for everything in our lab so we don't forget and waste time. So we'll say finish. Cool. So we have our server now, and you'll see here it says press Control-Alt-Delete to unlock, and if you press it a bunch of times, nothing happens because it's in a VM. There's always some special way to press Control-Alt-Delete in VM. So we'll click on our window, and depending on if you're using Mac or PC, you'll go to Input and then Keyboard, and then you'll see this Insert Control-Alt-Delete, and then you can click it and it will push it for you, or you can kind of do this keystroke if you can figure out what that is. So if you click this, for example, it will type Control-Alt-Delete for you. And now we can log in with our password that we won't forget because it's so easy. Don't use that password in real life, by the way. lab is okay. So we'll let our server start up here for the first time. And the very first thing we're going to do, we're going to install something called the VM guest editions. It kind of will give us a better experience. You notice on my screen the mouse is kind of lagging around a little bit, and it kind of sucks. And then when we make this bigger, like the screen, the VM itself like doesn't get any bigger. See, so to do that, we'll go to devices up here, and then we'll click insert guest editions CD image, and we can just close all these things that are opening here. Don't need to deal with it quite yet. So after, again, make sure this is inserted, and then go, when you go to your server, go to Explorer down here, and then go to PC, and then this, you'll see this VirtualBox guest edition. So go ahead and double click that, and then run the AMD 64 one, and just like next, yes, continue, like, you know, whatever you, all the positive things. So we'll let this install, say yes. Doing this ahead of time kind of makes our life much easier, like a better quality of life, because like everything kind of speeds up a little bit. So instead of rebooting now, if you did, it's okay, but just say I want to reboot later, and then we're actually going to shut the VM down first. So just go shut down and just say continue. We'll let this shut down. I noticed for some reason, maybe it happened like once when I just restarted, like it didn't work or something. So I'm just going to shut it down this time. So this is our, ignore this. It's not, you know, part of the lab. So go to our DC. This is our VM we made, and we can double click it to start it, or click start here. So I'll just double click this, start our virtual machine back up. And then if you know the keystroke, go ahead and push it. Otherwise, go to input and Control Delete. And then we will log in one more time. We're going to be restarting a whole bunch of times, by the way. So we have this now. We'll notice, you notice the mouse is, it's not really lagging anymore. Right. And then we should be able to resize this. I think sometimes it takes some time to start working. Okay, there we go. So for example, you can just make this window big, and it will kind of auto adjust the resolution. That's what that guest, what is that called? The guest editions does. So cool. So now that we have that installed, let's go ahead and set up our IP addressing. So remember, if we look at our diagram here, we have two NICs. We have that kind of one that's dedicated to the internet, and then we have this kind of internal one that's going to be used for our internal network. And the one that's on the internet, it will automatically get an IP address from like your home router, so we don't have to do anything for that one. But for the internal one, we have to set it up manually. So we'll go back to our VM here, and we'll click this kind of network looking icon down here, and then click network. And then we say, I think it's change adapter options. I don't usually go to it this way. So we'll notice we have two of them here, and we have to kind of figure out which one is which and then name them appropriately, because we have to use these later for something when we're setting up routing. So let's check out the first one. We'll go to status and details. And this looks like your proper home IP address, like 10 something. So this is probably the one, right, that's connected to the internet. This is the Comcast DNS server for me. So I'm going to rename this one. You can right click it and say rename. We'll name this one like internet, just so we can kind of identify it. Then we'll look at the other one. I know this one's the internal one, but I just want to kind of explain. So we go to details, and you can see this like 169.254. This basically means that this adapter, if we look at the picture, this adapter was looking for a DHCP server here to try to get an IP address from somewhere, but it was unable to find one. So this going back to the VM, this 169.254 address was automatically assigned to it. So that's how we know it's the internal one. So when you find the adapter with this one, you know it's the internal one. So I'm going to go ahead and rename this one to, I'll name this like something like really obvious, like internal, something like this, just so it's very different from the other one. So we have our IP addressing set up. We didn't have to do anything with this one. It's for the internet. This one's for our internal network here. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to rename this PC because it has some kind of weird name right now. So the easiest way to do that is to right click the start menu and go to system. And then we'll click rename this PC. We can see the current name is some like arbitrary name. So we'll just name it DC. This stands for domain controller. And we'll say next, and we'll say restart. and continue. It's going to restart it again. Going to do this a whole bunch of times. Cool. So we will log in again, input, keyboard, control, delete, password 1. Cool. So the next thing we're going to do, looking at our diagram to kind of give us a good overview of kind of what's going on and what we've done so far. So far we've created our virtual machine here. We have our internet NIC, we have our internal NIC, and we gave an IP address. Oh, we didn't actually give the IP address. So let me do that now. I meant to do that before we restarted, but so let's do that now. So we'll click on network again down here. Let's go back to the VM. We'll click on network down here. And we'll say change adapter options, and we'll go to internal here, and we'll say properties, and we're going to change our IPv4, and then we're going to say use the following IP addresses. So if we look at our diagram, the way I kind of architected this out, I don't really have time to dive into the nuances of IP addressing and all that. So you'll just have to take a leap of faith for now. But we're going to assign this IP address to our internal one, this 172.16.0.1, and then the mask 245.245.245.0. And we're not going to use a default gateway because the domain controller itself is going to serve as the default gateway. It has 2 NICs, one on the internet, one on the inside. So this particular NIC is not going to use a default gateway. And then for DNS server, when we install Active Directory, it automatically installs DNS. So this server is going to actually use itself as the DNS server. So to do that, we can either enter like its own IP address. We can do this, and that works fine. Or we can also enter the loopback address, which is this. This is kind of a generic address that refers to myself. So whenever a computer pings like 127.0.0.1, they're pinging themselves automatically. So likewise, if we want to use ourselves as the DNS, we can kind of use this loopback address, and this computer will use itself as DNS. So we'll say okay. Okay, now we can close this. So looking at our network diagram, we have our NICs. We configured IP addressing for this one. This NIC is connected to the internal network where nothing else is actually there yet. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to install Active Directory domain services. That's this ADDS thing. And then we're going to create a domain. So that's the next step, kind of what we're going to do. So we can close this and close this. And then where it says add roles and features, we'll click on this. We'll say next, next. And this is where you pick the server where you want to install the thing that you're going to install, which is Active Directory Domain Services. We only have one server, so we're just going to select the server we're going to use. And then we're going to choose Active Directory Domain Services, which is right here. Be sure you don't accidentally choose one of the other ones. Active Directory Domain Services, and we'll say next, 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 and then install. And this tends to take a while, so I'm just going to cut this out to save you some time. Cool, so now that the role has been installed, we can close this. And we'll notice up here, there's this little flag with this yellow thing. So let's go ahead and click that. And then we have to do our post deployment configuration. That is, we installed the software for Active Directory Domain Services, but we didn't actually create the domain yet. So we'll click this to promote this computer to a domain. And we are going to say add new forest. And then we can name the domain anything you want. Like you can name it like even like this. But for our example, we're just going to use like mydomain.com, just because it's like, you know, kind of generic. And I think I can't remember if I wrote the script I hard coded this or not, but just use this to kind of follow along more easily with the tutorial. So we'll say, make sure we say add new forest, mydomain.com, and we'll say next. And we're never going to use this, but we have to enter it anyway. So I'll just put password 1. This is, oh my God, I always do that. I always mess up the password. Okay, so next. Just say next here, and next, and next, next, and install. And then now that it's finished, it's going to automatically restart the computer for us. So now after an eternity, it has restarted. we're going to log in again with our built-in admin password or built-in admin account. And you'll notice we have this like my domain /administrator now. Didn't have that before. So we'll log in with password 1. And now we're actually going to create our own dedicated domain admin account instead of using the built-in administrator account. So we can do that by going to Start, and then Administrative Tools, and then Active Directory, Users and Computers. Be careful you don't click on one of the other Active Directory things. So Active Directory, Users and Computers. Wait for that to open. So we can expand this. And then see this mydomain.com. This is our newly created domain. It's all fresh. So let's just, let's create an organizational unit to put our admin account in. So an OU, there's a lot that can be said about these, but we can just think about it as kind of like a folder in Active Directory for now. So we'll name it, let's name it admins. I'll uncheck this because it's annoying when I try to delete it later. And inside of here, we will create a new user and just name it like whatever your name is. And then for the username, like kind of the common naming convention in a lot of organizations is like a dash and then like whatever their naming convention is. So for example, we're going to use like first name or first initial, last name. So in our case, I'm going to use a-j Matacor to signify this is an admin account for J Matacor, Josh Matacor, that's me. So a-j Matacor, we'll say next, and password, we're just going to use password 1 for everything. Now I'm going to uncheck user must change, and then I'm going to check, no, not that one. I'm going to uncheck password never expires because it's a lab environment. I don't want to deal with the password until we do password policy or something. So we'll say finish, and you'll notice our account here. So we have an account, but it's not an admin yet, even though we named it a-. So to make it a domain admin, we'll right click it and go to properties, and we'll go to member of, and I'll say add, and then we'll say domain admins, and we'll say check. We see it resolves to domain admins, so we'll say okay, apply. Okay, so now we have our very own domain admin account. So to use this, let's go ahead and log out of the domain controller. So we'll say sign out. And then we'll do our Control-Alt-Delete again. And then instead of logging into this administrator one, we're going to go to other user, and we see it says sign into my domain here. We're going to use our domain admin account. So I'm going to do a-j Matacor. So whatever you made yours, a-, whatever your name is. And then password. Hopefully you did password 1. It's easy. We'll say enter. Cool. And it pulled our name from Active Directory, and it's going to log us in. So now that we've logged in, looking back at our kind of network map over here, the next thing we're going to do is install RAS /NAT. That's like a remote access server network address translation. The purpose of this is to allow, when we create our Windows 10 client, it's going to allow this client to be on this kind of private virtual network, but still be able to access the internet through the domain controller. So we're going to install NAT, like RAS and NAT, on the domain controller to allow our clients to do that. So to do this, we will go to add roles and features. Say next, next, and this is our server. Yeah, next. And for roles, it's remote access, which is kind of a strange name for what we're doing, but that's the role we need to install. So next, and we're gonna install routing. And this, like other thing, is automatically selected. So we'll say next, 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 and then install. And this will take a little while, so I'll trim this out. Cool. Now that the role is done installing, we can close this. And then we can go to tools and then go to routing and remote access. And sometimes this messes up and I have to restart the computer, but hopefully it doesn't this time. So we'll go to configure and enable. We'll say next. And then we want to install NAT to allow internal clients to connect to the internet using one address. So we'll say next. And for some reason, yeah, this is supposed to be selected, and we're supposed to be able to see like our internal and external interface here, but we can't for some reason. So I'm going to cancel this. Let me try to open it again. So we'll go to tools and then routing. I don't know why that happens. It's like really troublesome. So we'll right click this again, configure, next, NAT. Wow, surprise, it's here. So use this public interface to connect to the internet. And that's why we named these, so we can like obviously see which one's which. And we figured out this is our internet one. So the one that we named internet, we'll select this one, like use this interface to connect to the internet. So we'll choose the internet interface and we'll say next and say finish. Take a little bit. Cool. And now we see this thing is green and it has this like little arrow that's up. And so this is configured totally. So if we look at our network diagram again, we have all this stuff set up over here, and then we have our domain set up, and then we just configured this RAS and NAT. So this is finished now. So now once we have Windows 10 clients, they should be able to get to the internet, assuming we set up DHCP for them, which is the next step. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to set up a DHCP server on our domain controller with this scope information, and I'll kind of explain that in a little bit. But what this is going to do is allow our Windows 10 clients to get an IP address that will let them get on the internet and browse the internet, even though they're on this kind of private internal network, just like in your office or school. So to set up our DHCP, we'll go back to the domain controller. We'll go to add roles. We'll say next. This is our server. You'll notice the name changed to like DC dot something. So we'll say next, and then we're going to select DHCP and add features, and next. Install. Again, this will take a little bit, so we'll just wait for that. So our DHCP role is finished installing, so we can close this window and we can go to tools and DHCP, and we can set up our scope, assuming that it opens. So here's our kind of DHCP control panel. So the whole purpose of DHCP is to allow, computers on the network, like client computers on the network, to automatically get their IP addresses. So looking at our diagram here, we defined the scope as we're gonna create a scope that will give IP addresses in this range, this 172.16.0.100 with this subnet mask. So going back to the VM, we can go to our DHCP server here, and we'll notice these are both down, they're red. So we're going to right click one and we're going to say new scope, and we'll say next. And in my lab, I usually name the scope after what the IP range is. So I'll just name this 172.16.0.100 through 200, because that's our range we're going to use. I'll say next. And the start address is 172.16.0.100. 16.0.200, and then I gave this mask of /24, aka 255.255.255.0. I wish I could just like explain IP addressing in depth here, but it will take like 3 hours probably. Well, maybe you can do it in an hour with examples, but it takes a long time. Just gonna have to have faith on these, I guess. So we'll say next, and exclusions. So like what IP addresses don't we want to give out in that range, and we don't really need to add any exclusions. Lease duration is how long a computer can have that IP address before it needs to be refreshed, and it just depends on your use case. So for example, if you're running a cafe, like a Starbucks or something, and you have a lease time of 8 hours, say somebody comes and gets on the Wi-Fi, drinks coffee, and then leaves after like 30 minutes. Like that lease, or not 8 hours, sorry, like 8 days, that lease is going to be tied up for 8 days, and no one else can have that IP address until the lease expires. So if you're like running a cafe, you may want to make the lease like 2 hours instead of 8 days or something. But if you're just on a lab, like our home lab, eight days, I mean, that's good as any, I guess. So we're just going to say next, and it's asking if we want to configure DHCP options. That means like we want to tell the clients which server to use for DNS, like which server to use for like the gateway, and we do want to configure those things because we want them to be able to get on the internet. So we're going to say yes, and it's saying to add an IP address for a router used by clients, enter the address below. So if we look at our network diagram here, we see that we configured NAT on the domain controller, and the domain controller has like routing configured as well. So its job is to amongst other things, like forward traffic from the clients to the internet. So because of this, the clients are going to use this internal NIC of the domain controller as their default gateway / router. So going back to our DHCP configuration, we're just going to enter the domain controller's IP address here. It's hard to talk and like do stuff at the same time. So this is the domain controller's IP address that has NAT configured on it. So we'll say next, and then it's asking like, what do you want to use for your domain server or your DNS server? Again, when you install Active Directory on the domain controller, it automatically installs DNS. And so because of that, we're going to use the domain controller as our DNS server. Well, we essentially have to do that, or we can't join the domain in this case. So we'll say next. Oh, it's already here, by the way, so that's why I don't have to add it. So I'll say next. And wins server, wins, I don't care about this. I think it's old, so we'll say next. And yes, I want to activate the scope, so we'll say next and finish. And you may have to, let me refresh this. Yeah, you may have to right-click the DHCP server up here and say authorize. So we'll do that. And then right-click this one more time and say refresh. And then we can see our IPv4 thing turned green here, and then we can see our scope here. We don't, if we could click leases, there's no leases in there yet because we didn't create our client computer. But anyway, we have our DNS set up now. So before we actually go and create our client computer and like join it to the domain and all that, first we're going to use our PowerShell script to create a whole bunch of users in Active Directory. So we can kind of have a bunch of sample users and we don't have to manually create a whole bunch of them. So to do that, we're going to get this link from, actually, let me just, okay, actually, before we do any of that, go back to the domain controller here, and then we have to make a configuration that lets us browse the internet from the domain controller. Usually you don't want to do this on like a production environment, but we're just in a lab. So we're going to click configure this local server, and then we're going to disable this Internet Explorer enhanced security thing right here. So click on, and then we're going to turn off. If this is on, like before every page loads, it like spams us like, are you sure you want to load this? Are you sure? But if we turn it off, we can just browse pretty normally. So I'm going to copy the link to the source code for the PowerShell script we're going to use to create all the users. I'll put that link in the description, but we'll go to the domain controller and open up Internet Explorer and say okay. And then we'll paste that link up here. It's this link right here. Again, in the description, we'll say enter. It's going to download. So we're going to save as, and just we're going to put it on the desktop so it's easy to access. So save that to the desktop. I'm going to minimize everything here, minimize Active Directory. Let's just go ahead and extract this script on the desktop, and I'll kind of explain it before we dive into like running it and everything. So I'll open this folder, and there's this PowerShell script in here, as you can see, and then there's this plain text file called names. Let's open this first. I'll make this bigger. Basically, this has 1,000 randomized names in it. It's just names of, I think I used like some name generator to like create it. So at the very top, go ahead and add your own name. We're going to use this file to programmatically create all of these users. And we're going to create one for ourselves too. So go ahead and put your name at the top. I mean, it doesn't have to be your name, but it's for, you know, realism, I guess. So we'll add your name, we'll save this, and we'll close this. And then click on Start, and then go to Windows PowerShell. In this PowerShell ICE, the plain one, go ahead and right click that, and then go to More, and then Run as Administrator. And then say yes. We'll let this open, and then we'll go to Open here, and then go to the desktop, and then our folder, and then we're going to open this PowerShell script. I'll blow this up a little bit, and don't worry about this. It looks noisy, but I'll explain everything. We can close that, blow this up a little bit more. So before we run anything or do anything, we have to enable the execution of all scripts on this server. So for example, I'll show you. If I try to like run this as is, it will say like, it's not digitally signed, you can't run it. So to get around this, this is a security feature, but this is our lab, so we don't care. So I'm just going to say set execution policy to unrestricted. So set execution policy unrestricted and say enter. And then it's going to be like, are you sure you want to do this? Just say yes to all, and then we're good to go. So before we run this script, I just want to kind of explain it. If you don't care about the explanation, just go ahead and use the bookmarks to skip ahead of this section, but I'm going to take a little bit of time to explain this here. So I just collapsed this. So up here, these are just variables that are used. As you can see, like I named it pretty well, I guess, but this is going to be the password that all of our user accounts are going to use. So they're all going to use the same password. And this get content from this /names text, this basically, let me open this again. So this get content basically, like you can imagine it as like just taking all these names and like copying them and then pasting them into inside of this variable as kind of an array. So it just pulls in all these names and puts them into this kind of array here. Cool. And then this line, this password equals this convert to secure string password, blah, blah, blah. This like takes this plain text password, that is this password one, and creates it into a, like a, I guess an object that PowerShell can use as a secure password. So this is used later on down here when we're creating the users in Active Directory. So this line just takes the plain text password and creates kind of a password object for it. And then this new AD organizational unit -name users, all this line does essentially, if I go back to Active Directory, let me reopen that again. I'll go to start, admin tools, Active Directory, users and computers. So all this line does here, new AD OU, you remember we created this like admins OU, like we right clicked here and then we said new, and then we said organizational unit. All this line does is create another one of those with it's called _users this time instead of _admin. And then this -protected from accidental deletion equals false. All that is organizational unit. So if you're creating a new one, all it does, this false essentially like unchecks this box. So that's all that line does. And then this for each, this is essentially a loop. You can collapse it. It says for each n inside user first and last list. So basically this user first and last list contains like a whole list of users, and then this block of code will run for each individual user in that list. And this n is representation of the current user that's being examined. So the first n, for example, the first n will be Josh Madakor. The second n will be this person. So this loop will run like 1,000 times for each, like one for each user. Cool. So, crap. So this first line here, this first equals n.split from space, first element to lower. So what this line does, this n.split is, so this is n, and it's going to split it based on this space right here. So it's going to split, and then it's going to take the first element, that's element 0, and then store it in this variable called first, which is going to be the first name. The second line here is going to, again, split it from the space, and then it's going to take, it's going to split from the space, and then it's going to take element 1, so this is element 0, this is element 1, and it's going to store it in the last name, or last. And then this username variable here, it kind of concatenates two things. It takes the first name, so that is this, dot substring 01, so that means at the 0 place, take 1 character. So in other words, it's going to take the first character of the first name and then kind of glue it to the last name and then put it to lowercase. So this is going to become like something like this, like J Madakor, and this is going to become D Earls, and this is going to become S Nell. So this line, it's kind of manipulating the first and last name to create the username. And then this line 13, this is it's just outputting something to us on the screen. It's going to be in like the cyan or light blue color. It's going to say like creating like this user. It doesn't do anything but just alert us that a user is being created. And then this line, this is actually just one line. It's just really long, so I kind of split it up into, you know, multiple lines to look at easily. This new user, you can probably guess what this does. It just creates a new user in Active Directory. So that's the kind of the equivalent of like coming in here and like right-clicking and saying like new, and then user, and then like filling in these relevant fields. That's what this thing is doing. So it's making a new user. The password it's assigning is this password, which is actually password 1. The given name is the first name, which was created here. It's being passed in. The last name, as you can guess, is here. This display name, and then employee ID, they're all going to use the username. That's going to be like the first initial, last name. Password never expires equals true. That's the equivalent to like checking that box or whatever when we create it with the GUI. And then the OU, it's going to get put in this OU like called underscore users. It's not created yet, but that's what this line does. It's going to create the OU for us. And then enable just means the user account is going to be enabled. So when we run this, it's going to pull like all these 1,000 users, and it's just going to create all these users with this code. And it's pretty cool, I guess. So if we look in here and we refresh our domain, we don't see the OU in here, the user's OU. So that's cool. And then, oh, also one last thing. Before we run this, we have to, if we run it from this kind of like interface, we have to go to the actual directory where the script is at to make it work, I guess, to be able to actually pull in this names.txt. Oh, there's another way to do it, but I'm just going to go to that directory. So we'll go down here, and we're going to go to CD for change directory, and we're going to go to the C drive, and we put it on our desktop, remember. So we'll go to users, and then whatever your account is that you're logged into, mine is a-jmaticore, and then backslash desktop backslash AD here, and then we'll say enter. And then if we say ls, we can see that the names.txt is in here. So all we have to do now is click play, and it should create all of our accounts. Oh, it says like, are you sure you want to do this? You got it from the internet. So we can just say run. Well, that was odd. What did I do? Oh, okay. So it's going to import the Active Directory module, and then it's just going to start creating the users. And this blue thing you're seeing on the screen, this is a result of this line right here. It's right. Oh my God, I made a typo. Crap. Anyway, this blue thing you're seeing is a result of this line. So if you want to be like, you know, special or something, you can change the foreground to magenta, or you can, you know, change the colors or something, or manipulate this literally in any way you want to. And it's just going to go through and create the users. And this is going to take forever because there's 1,000 users. So I'm just going to stop the recording and let it go, and then I'll come back when it finishes. Oh, actually, by the way, before I do that, check out Active Directory in the meantime really quick. And we'll right click on our domain here, and we'll say refresh. And then when we refresh it, we can see that we have our users folder that the script created. And we can see there's a bunch of users inside. And also, if we right click our domain and we say find, and we make sure this users thing is selected, and we just say find like this, you can see there's like a whole bunch of users now. There's like 400 something users, and there'll be more and more until there's like, you know, over 1,000 when all of them are done creating. So I'm just gonna kind of get out of this for now. You might have noticed a couple of errors in here. Let me see if I can, I don't know if I can go to it. Well, there's some errors, but that's because there's duplicates somewhere in this list, and I just didn't take the time to figure out where they were. So don't worry if you see the errors, the script will still run, and it should be okay. So now that all of our users are created, we'll go back to Active Directory just to kind of check things out. So I'll refresh this again, and then I can go to find and try to search for yourself and see, you should, if you search like this, like your first initial and last name, it should find, yeah, you found your user in here. And I wonder if we search for like, just like your last name, if it will find both. Yeah, so I searched for just my last name, and it found like, this is, one of them is the admin account. Yeah, this is the admin account. And then it found this other one, which is just our normal account, like the non-administrator account. So that's pretty cool. And also if we search for just blank, we can see that it's going to find like about 1,000, maybe like, you know, a little more based on like, yeah, so there's some built-in accounts as well. So found 1,000 accounts. So it's pretty cool. If we look in our users folder, we see like all these accounts that were created. So this is kind of a neat thing. You can kind of experiment with it and play with it a little bit. So yeah, now that we have all of our users created and our whole environment set up, let's look at our network diagram again here really quick. So we pretty much have everything set up here. Our internet is connected. We have our NIC set up. We have like our domain set up with all of our users. We have NAT set up. We have like our DHCP set up, and we're connected to our kind of internal VMware network here. The very last thing we have to do really is create this Windows 10 virtual machine in VirtualBox. It's just going to use a internal NIC, and it should get its IP address, like it says here, from our DHCP server that we configured, and then we'll verify that after the fact. So let's go back to our VM. Actually, let's minimize this domain controller because we're kind of done dealing with that for now. We'll come back to it later. So go to VirtualBox, and then we're going to create a new VM. So we'll just name this one Client 1, the Windows 10 64-bit. So we'll say continue. Again, just hopefully you have enough RAM. I'm going to give it, actually I'll give it 4 gigabytes. If you don't know, maybe just leave it at 2. Just continue all of these things. And then before we turn it on and do all that fancy stuff, let's go to settings again. And then go to advanced and turn on the clipboard just so we can copy and paste if we ever need to for anything. And then we'll go to system also, and then go to processor. I'm going to give myself more. Again, if you know you have it, go ahead and give it to yourself. And then for the network, instead of using NAT and connecting to our home network, we're going to click internal network adapter. Like looking at our diagram, you can see we configured it to use the internal one, so on purpose, so we can connect to like, we can get a DHCP address from the domain controller, and we can like do all this fancy stuff. We're trying to emulate like a corporate network, so we're gonna choose the internal network adapter and say okay. And now we can just double click our client here. It will open up somewhere. It keeps opening up on the other screen for me, so we'll check this. And then we're going to say add, and then we're going to browse to wherever that Windows 10 ISO is that we downloaded earlier. Maybe you put yours on the desktop. I think I mentioned maybe putting it on the desktop. So browse to there, pick your Windows 10 ISO and just say choose. Say start, and we will let it start here. This will take some time too. I'll probably like trim this up a little bit so it doesn't take forever. Cool, and we can say next and install. And we'll just say, I don't have a product key. And don't install home because you can't join the domain with home last time I checked. So we'll just say Windows 10 Pro, next. And accept, next. And we're gonna say custom because the hard drive's empty, and we'll just say next to install. And this is probably going to take a while. I think the computer should restart a couple times, so I'll trim that out. So it finished installing, now it's restarting, and it's going to ask us to do some other kind of lame stuff. I'll just pause this while this is still going. By the way, don't push a button when you see that thing, that push any key to continue, because that will like restart the setup. You don't want to do that. We should be almost done here. Okay, now for our user config, just say yes, United States, if that's what that said. Yes. Skip. If this thing asks, just say like, I don't have internet. And we'll say continue with limited setup. This setup is like really strange. It's like always different. I notice it must be like pulling stuff from the internet. But anyway, you don't want to, if it asks, say you're using it for home, and then if it asks, always say like, oh, I want to use the limited version, because it's going to try to like make you create a Microsoft account, and you don't want to do that. Like try to create a local account or you know, use for home or like whatever, because this setup like changes all the time. I don't know why I just saw what I saw, but anyway, this is going to be our local username. So I'm just going to name it user. And then we don't need a password. So we'll just say next. And this part, you can just say next if you're impatient, but I tend to like turn all of these off. Say accept. And not now, whatever it is you're offering. Cool. So let me move this a little bit. Let me open up our domain controller. Get that in the background. Cool. So now our Windows 10 is set up. And the first thing I want to do is make sure the internet is working, because I suspect something's wrong with it. So let's just you know, click start and then go to the command line and type ipconfig. And so I have an IP address, but for some reason I don't have a default gateway. That's strange. So let's go back to our, maybe yours works for some reason. Maybe I messed something up. I can't remember. So let's go back. This is the domain controller, by the way. So I'm just going to log in here. Password 1. So I'm going to open up the DHCP. Again, if you forgot or if you closed it, just go to like server manager. Actually, I'll just go to server manager here and then go to, oh my God, then go to tools and then DHCP. So I'm going to check out our lease because for some reason my host didn't get a default gateway for some odd reason here. Oh, that should be in server options. Oh, no. IPv4 server options. Oh, there's none. What the heck? I'm pretty sure I added that. So we're gonna add router, and then we're going to add the domain controller. The domain controller's IP address, because if we look at our network diagram, the domain controller is here and it has an IP address of 172.16.0.1, and this thing is serving as the default gateway for the clients. So our DHCP should have server options for a router, which is the default gateway. I thought I set this, but apparently I didn't, I guess. So I'll add this, say apply, and then I'm going to restart this. So I'll right click the server and all tasks and then restart. We'll just wait for this to go. So these are up again, and server options, we have our router now. I don't know why that happened. That's very odd. So if I go here, so I'm going to go back to the client, by the way. This is our Windows 10. Again, VirtualBox client 1 right here. And I'm just going to check again. So I'll say ipconfig and no default gateway. So I'm going to say ipconfig renew and see if that fixes it. Renew. Dope. So default gateway. Now we have a default gateway. I don't know why that happened. It could be my lack of sleep or something, but at least we could do a little bit of troubleshooting in the lab, I guess. So it looks like our IP addressing works. So let's try to ping like something on the internet. So for example, so because google.com resolved, that means our DNS server is working. And because we can ping to the internet, that means if we look at our network diagram, that means this whole like infrastructure is working. So we have connectivity all the way to the default gateway, which is the domain controller, and then the domain controller is properly natting it and forwarding it out to the internet, and then it can properly come back. Our ping can come back and come back to us as a echo reply. So all this infrastructure is working, and we should be good to go. So if we go back to our client here, we can try, of course, I'm sure this is going to work, but we can ping mydomain.com, which is our domain controller, and the ping, it responds, which is good. So before we do anything, let's change the name. So for example, if we type host name, we have this like kind of weird name here. So let's right click the start menu and go to system. And then instead of clicking rename this PC, let's just scroll down a bit and say rename this PC advanced, because we can actually join the domain at the same time. So click, don't type anything here. I see a lot of people doing that on accident, but go click this change under to rename this computer, click change. And then we're going to name it client 1 according to our network architecture diagram thing. And then we're also going to try to join the domain at the same time. So mydomain.com is what we named our domain. So we can say okay. And then you need to type a password who's allowed to join this account to the domain. And remember, we created a domain admin account. We created 2 accounts actually. We created like our normal account, which I don't think will work. So let's just try it. I don't suspect it will work. I just want to convey that, I guess. Oh, it actually worked. That's cool. Okay, I was going to use the domain admin account, but I mean, that's cool if the normal account works. And say okay. Close this and say restart. And then while this client is restarting, let's go back to look at some stuff in our domain controller again. So we'll go back to the domain controller and go to the DHCP, which is, it's open right here. But if you forgot or closed it, you can always go to like start and then server manager and then tools and then DHCP. And DHCP is here. And let's click on our, this is the scope that we made for our, oh my God, another one opened. So this is our scope. So let's expand this, and then let's go to expand this some more, and then go to address leases. And then we can see in here, we have one lease from our client computer. So when we created our client computer and like kind of joined it to the network, it reached out to the DHCP server automatically and requested an address, and then the DHCP server gave it an address, and then now we have this lease in here. So if you go to like, for example, your work DHCP server and you see this like leases folder, it's probably going to have like, you know, hundreds of addresses per scope. I mean, depending on like how big the scopes are, but anyway, when the client gets an address, it will show up in here under leases. So that's pretty cool. So another thing is, let's go to Active Directory users and computers. So this is still the domain controller VM. So we'll click start and we'll go to admin tools and then Active Directory users and computers here. And we'll come over here and we'll go into this computers container. And we can see that after we joined this client computer to the domain, like the thing we just did, this thing automatically came in here, kind of showing that this computer is a member of the domain. Like if I were to delete this right now, if I were to delete this, I wouldn't be able to log into it with one of those accounts we created. But since it's joined the domain, we can use any of these accounts to actually log into that computer, which is what we're going to do next. So let's go ahead and go back to the Windows 10 virtual machine. So we can say, you know, input keyboard control delete if you need to, or just, you know, get to it some other way. And then instead of logging in with that local user that we created, we can click other user, and then we can see down here that we're going to sign into my domain. This is mydomain.com. And because of this, we can use one of the user accounts that we created earlier in that kind of PowerShell Script bulk user creation job. So remember, our password for like every single user is just capital P password1. And remember, you put your user at the top of that file that is here. It should have created something with like your first initial and then last name. So if we go back to the Windows 10 JMaticore and just next to sign in, it should let us sign in. So this is the first time we're signing in, so it's doing this thing where it creates our profile, and it's like really annoying, but it's working. So essentially, looking at our network diagram, we've created like a mini corporate network with this. And we, like the account creation process, you can imagine it like we got hired, and then our name went into like some batch file somewhere, and then the next morning the batch script ran and then created like all the new accounts, and then our account was subsequently created. And then this, you can imagine this client one virtual machine, you can kind of imagine it as your corporate laptop. So you got that, and then you can automatically log into it with your corporate credentials because it's already on the domain and you're like already on the network and everything like that. So going back to our client computer, you can see we have our desktop and everything, and we're logged in, and everything is cool. If we go to command line and we say like, who am I? You can see that you're a member of my domain, and then your username is Josh Madakor. My username is Josh Madakor. But yeah, anyway, that pretty much concludes this tutorial. I hope you found it useful or educational or something. I know we had like some kind of error in there, and it takes forever to install the OSs and all that, but I hope you enjoyed it and it was interesting. If you did enjoy it, please feel free to like and subscribe. And if you know anyone who might be interested in this or might find it useful, if you could share with them, that would be great too. But I know this was long and complicated. If you have any questions or you got stuck anywhere, please leave a comment. I definitely read everyone's comments, and I'll answer any questions that you may have. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn or Facebook or wherever you happen to find me. It should all be in the description. But anyway, thank you so much for watching this far. I really appreciate it, seriously, and we will talk to you next time. Bye.
マジで長かったんだ。すごい早起き今日。マジ眠いんですけど。おやすみ。
Namush.